Good evening and welcome. Welcome one and all. Apologies for the last minute notice for this live stream. We mentioned on Wednesday that we are dealing with circumstances, and the nature of these circumstances are that everything is sort of moment by moment. When is life not moment by moment is the question that you might be asking yourself. But as a result of this, we are somewhat preoccupied. But the nature of the circumstances which we find ourselves preoccupied with actually lend themselves to tonight's topic, which is death. Death is inevitable. Death comes to us all. There's that great line from the film Gladiator when Ridley Scott is confronting the Emperor, or rather confronted by the Emperor. He's shackled in irons, and the Emperor comes to see him. And Maximus says to him, "A wise man once told me, death smiles on us all. All a man can do is smile back." And the Emperor asks him, "I wonder, did your friend smile at his own death?" And Maximus says, "You must know he was your father," suggesting that indeed Maximus knows that Commodus murdered his father. But it's the line, "Death smiles on us all, and all a man can do is smile back," which is so striking. It's an arresting line. It's an arresting line because there is so much truth in it. It goes without saying that for the past 2 years, this planet has been hypnotized and mesmerized by the fear of death. The circumstance which has completely arrested and shackled in irons this entire planet, the mainstream media, all governments, all government leaders, at all levels, apparently, all around the world. The fear of death. The fear of death is seemingly what drives everything these days. When we speak of specifically the circumstances around that peculiar strain of seasonal flu, which has been branded as this world plague, this deadly phenomenon. And regardless of your own beliefs regarding said plague, and we use the term loosely and ironically, the term that they like to use, of course, is pandemic. But everything that you see unfolding related to that circumstance is a consequence of a humanity which is terrified of death. They're terrified of the inevitability, the one certainty, the absolute guarantee of life. And as is evidenced by the escalating set of circumstances, mandates, so-called, related to this so-called global plague, as evidenced by the escalation of mandates and actions by governments against their people, and the level of compliance which we can observe in the general populace. We can see just to what degree this humanity is terrorized by the very thought of death, by the very likelihood, by the very possibility, however low, however unlikely. It is the contemplation of their own death which they wish to avoid above all else. People will go to unbelievable lengths to avoid death and avoid the topic of death. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to hear it. And should death reach them in some way, through the death of a loved one, the death of a friend, a companion, a pet, they greet death the only way they really know how, and that's with their fear. And fear, as you know, very quickly turns to anger and the desire to control, and the desire to control outcomes. And when one fears death as an outcome, as the ultimate outcome, because it is the ultimate outcome, there is no denying it. There is no avoiding it. No one can rationalize away their own death. No one can wish it away. No one can positive think away their own death. Although they try, they go to great lengths, especially those in the New Age. They talk about how death doesn't exist. It's just a transformation. It's just stepping from one world into another world. It's just continuation. It's an illusion. It's a myth. They have talked themselves out of death. The so-called positive thinkers. They see death as the ultimate negative idea, and they treat it as an idea. They treat it as a belief. And as long as they don't believe in it, then it doesn't exist. In the same way that Christians believe that as long as they believe in Jesus, they will be saved. It's the same mentality. Or as long as you believe in the great global awakening, then it'll happen. Positive thinking, the power of positive thinking. You can manifest your destiny. You can manifest your desires. You can manifest everything. And you can manifest yourself out of death. Okay, good luck with that. The world is shackled in irons because of the fear of death. And death, not just on an individual personal level, but on the macro cosmic scale. Death of a humanity, death of a planet. So the global elite are terrified not only of the masses, but they're terrified of the consequences of those sheer numbers, of an explosion of population. There are well-known schools of thought among the elites going back decades now, perhaps more, schools of thought which, in no uncertain terms, prescribe a culling, if you will. That is directly related to the jab, the injection, the so-called healing serum, which is now being prescribed to the masses around the world, and the various booster shots of this. And we shared a little bit about this, some of the details of this on Wednesday. But that is not the real plague. The real plague infesting and infecting this humanity is fear, and specifically the fear of death, the desire to avoid death at all costs, including personal freedom, quality of life, one's own integrity, one's compassion towards others, the very value of liberty itself. This planet is being turned into a prison because of those who will do anything to avoid death. So, where do we get off titling tonight's live stream, "The Power of Facing Death"? When so many will seemingly give up everything to avoid death, what is this? What is this power? And because we're looking at this from an esoteric framework, from an esoteric point of view, if we are locked in an adversarial relationship with the Black Lodge, with egos, and fear is such a powerful motivator, fear is such a powerful ego, it's the great chameleon. It holds so much sway over us and over others. And fear of death being the principal nucleus around which all other fears orbit. Fear of death is at the heart of it all. In the same way that lust, the desire for orgasm, the desire to fornicate, that desire, that lust, is at the heart of all other egos. The fear of death is at the heart of all other fears. Every other fear that manifests is simply a different expression, a different version of the fear of death. The fear of control, or the fear of control, the desire for control, the desire to control outcomes. Why would one want to control outcomes if not to avoid negative outcomes? One wants to control circumstances and outcomes to achieve positive outcomes. Well, what is the ultimate negative outcome? We mentioned it just a moment ago. The New Agers will tell you death is the ultimate negative thinking. They would listen in on this live stream and they would say, this is ridiculous. Why would I want to contemplate death? Why would I want to consider, why would I want to face death? I'm into positive thinking. I'm going to manifest my reality. And death is not a part of my reality. It might be a part of your reality, but not my reality. And so they live deluded. They live blinded. They live hypnotized and mesmerized by the desire to avoid death. And all their other desires manifesting their desires, manifesting their reality. All of that flows out of a deep fear of avoiding the facts, avoiding reality, and the ultimate reality, and the ultimate fact that is true for every single person without exception. It is a universal objective truth. And as you know, the ego hates objective truth. The ego is all about subjective reality. Oh, thank you, Benjamin. Thank you for those kind words. So tonight, let's delve into that objective reality. Let's grab the bull by the horns and let's see if we cannot uncover this power, this hidden power in this concept, in this phenomenon called death. And it is a power which clearly the ego does not want us to possess. And the ego will use the existence of this power against us. It inverts it, makes it into something negative, makes it into something that it wants to avoid, and therefore makes us desire to avoid, and uses that power against us, and uses that power to empower itself in its ability to make us avoid death, make us want to avoid death, which is where the world is today, where the world is willing to surrender itself to the ego, because the ego has convinced them that death is something that needs to be avoided at all costs. But what is death? Let's begin there. It's a good question. What does it mean to die? And perhaps in simplest terms, we can consider the example of a video game. And we often turn to video games as a practical and meaningful allegory, metaphor, because of their nature as a virtual space in which we temporarily inhabit or embody a character, and that character performs, goes on a journey of some kind to achieve something. And along the way, there are many obstacles, many tests, many challenges. And very often, the way these games are designed, your character can die. And the game makes no bones about this. And in the old days, late 70s, 80s, 90s, in the arcades, if you died, huge letters, huge words on the screen, game over, you died. Or later on, they got into the habit of saying, continue, and they gave you a 10-second countdown. So quickly you could put in another quarter or another 50 cents to keep going, to continue your game, to get another life or another 3 lives. Death is defined by life. When you run out of life, you enter into death. Death is the transition from one life to the next. There is a period, a process which takes place. That process is death. Death is not permanent. At least not insofar as our monad is concerned, not insofar as our higher self is concerned. As far as our personality is concerned, as far as our physical body is concerned, death is permanent. Our personality and our physical body dies, but our personality doesn't die when we die, but it also doesn't endure, it doesn't live forever, unless, well, even in those circumstances, it can endure for a longer period of time if it is continually fed with energy. So this is the phenomenon of ghosts, of spirits which walk the earth, which those personalities, those ghosts, don't know that they're dead. Personality doesn't know that it's dead. It continues its activities as if it were alive. That's why we've said in the past, Elvis Presley still haunts Graceland. Because there's an entire world of fans out there that still listen to his records, and there are literally thousands upon thousands of Elvis Presley impersonators that do shows. And people pour their heart and mind and energy into the persona of Elvis Presley, which is kept alive. And so the personality of Elvis is literally kept alive, kept animated, with all of that attention, with all of that energy. But the monad of Elvis Presley is not there. It's moved on to greener pastures, well, presumably, but not necessarily. We don't know the nature of Elvis's karma. In Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about this space called the Bardo. And the Bardo literally means in between. And if we can visualize three-dimensional reality, so this life, and we can visualize nirvana or the astral plane or the lunar astral plane, which is Klipoth, as a different space, then there is room for a space, a transitional space in between these different levels, these different spaces of existence, these different spaces of reality. Despite the fact that all these spaces are actually intertwined and interconnected, the word that we prefer to use is interlaced, a term which, although originally the term comes from the woven patterns of Islamic art, the interlacing, and not just Islamic art, but also the illumination which the medieval monks did on Bibles, the interlacing. So it's the woven, an interwoven pattern image. So these different spaces are interlaced. However, to transition from one to the other, there's an in-between, there's a Bardo. And the Bardo is where we go when we die, temporarily. and we undergo the process of death. And that process is described in fair detail in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, also the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And there is revealed the great ceremony whereby Anubis and the lords of karma intercede on our very existence, the existence of our monad, and our heart is weighed against a feather. This is a symbol, of course. And if it's heavier than a feather, our heart is thrown to the waiting jackal, the waiting crocodile, I believe, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Anyway, it's a monster, it's a creature, but I believe it's a crocodile that is there to receive our heart, which is too heavy to enter into nirvana. It is heavy, it is weighed down with ego. Now, of course, this is a symbol, but it describes the process which we undergo in the Bardo, determining where we are headed, where we are going to go. And this process, believe it or not, takes place every night when we go to sleep. When we go to sleep, if we dream, we are in one level. Our monads, we leave our body. And we enter into the fifth dimension, the astral plane. But which fifth dimension we enter, the solar astral plane or the lunar astral plane, is entirely dependent upon the weight of our own heart. It is entirely dependent on the nature of our own bodies. If our mind and our heart are lunar, are infested with ego, and are mechanical, then we find ourselves dreaming. And we are being batted around in those dreams like a mouse that's being toyed with by a cat. We enter into our subconscious mind, the world of the subconscious. We enter into Klipoth, we enter into hell, the lunar astral plane. And of course, it's very real. We can have very vivid dreams. But those experiences are entirely determined by our level of being, our level of consciousness, how awake we are. Having said that, many people are able to lucid dream. And because they are able to lucid dream, they believe themselves to be more awake than they actually are. However, one cannot deny that one who is able to lucid dream has some semblance of their solar bodies created. So they might suffer from mystic pride as a result of them making up beliefs about themselves because they can travel in the astral plane. Unfortunately, the New Age likes to propagate that awakening in the astral plane means you've ascended to the astral plane and that you're now in heaven, you have access to the universe. But regardless, the point is, where we go when we die is directly related to where we go when we sleep. If we are unable to awaken in the astral plane, no matter what we do, no matter what we try, no matter what technique we use, we have a lot of work to do on ourselves. If we are able to project into the astral plane, that's good. But it doesn't mean that our work is done, because we have to be able to awaken in the 6th dimension, not just the 5th. We have to be able to awaken in the causal plane. We have to be able to create our solar causal body, a human soul. So, as we've discussed in the past, this work that we have to do is also a form of death. It's psychological death. You may have heard the expression, to die before you die, or to die while you're still alive. To die before you die means to actively pursue psychological death, death of the egos, death of the I. And no matter how you slice it, you should recognize at this point how facing death and facing your own death and contemplating where you will go after you die, what will be your fate, and recognizing that your fate after you die is entirely in your hands, and that to improve your plight, to improve your destination after dying, also happens to include the process of death, of psychological death. You're beginning to see the importance and the power of death as a process, of death as a phenomenon. Death is the process of birth. Every creation is a destruction. Every birth is preceded by a death. Now, that doesn't immediately ring true, doesn't immediately seem self-evident. But consider, just for a moment, the sperm that unites with the zygote, that unites with the egg, the ovum. The sperm enters the ovum and dies. It dies. The purpose of the sperm, its very short life, has but one purpose, and that is to deliver genetic material to the ovum, to the egg, to fertilize the egg. That's its one and only purpose. Once that purpose is achieved, it's accomplished, and it delivers the package, it delivers the genetic material, the chromosomes, the DNA, it dies. In fact, it practically swims itself to death just to achieve that, just to arrive, and then it's obliterated in the process of transferring the chromosomes, the DNA, inside the ovum in order for the complete DNA strand to be synthesized, at which moment the ovum ceases to become an ovum and becomes a zygote. It is completed. It becomes a fertilized egg, a zygote, and then it begins to replicate. The sperm dies. In no uncertain terms, this is the process of creation on every level. And it is always the feminine energy which mediates that death and creation. Another example might be someone who is inspired to paint or inspired to write a piece of music. They receive that music in their mind. And however glorious and beautiful and perfect it is in their mind, however they've received it, they bring it into the world. They put it down on paper. They put it into the keyboard. They write it down in notes. There is a kind of death that takes place. In the crystallization of the ethereal, of the into the corporeal, there's a sort of death which takes place. The fecundation of the material world, the limitations of the material world, the limitations of this crude level of reality, in a way kills the inspiration. Something dies in its spirit form in order to be born in material form. Now, it doesn't mean that it's dead in that purest sense. But like the DNA inside the sperm is not dead. In fact, it's achieving new life. But the sperm itself dies. The same thing can be said of a seed. A seed which falls from the tree, like a walnut, for example, falls from the tree. Before that walnut can become a tree of its own, that seed has to die. That walnut has to die. Its shell has to crack. Its innards have to be consumed. It must sprout. And we've all presumably witnessed a seed or a bean or a seed of some kind sprouting. We've all done this in elementary school, most likely. We had our little bean and we wrapped it in moist paper towel, or God only knows how it was in your elementary school. And then we watered it and we put it in the sunlight and everything else. And then we witnessed how it sprouted. But the bean died. That was never emphasized to us because we were delicate children. But the bean dies in order to allow and enable the bean sprout to live. Death, therefore, is a process, a universal process of transitioning from one form to another form, from one space to another space, from one level to another level, from one form of being into a different form of being. The being remains. So Death, then, is a process of formulation, deforming, and reforming. Death applies to the form of being, its level of being, but the being remains constant. It is the being which travels through the process of death, life through death, back into life. So let's back up then. Knowing this, if we meditate and contemplate on our innermost being itself as a seed, it's only a seed, an essence. But what is it an essence of? What is it a seed of? It is an essence, it is an individuated spark, it is an individuated essence of the Logos, the cosmic Christ. And if we know, in order for a seed to sprout and become a tree, it must die. In order for the sperm to become a human being, it must die. It must sacrifice itself. And it sacrifices itself to the ovum, to the egg. It is the masculine energy, the divine masculine force, the divine masculine impulse to serve and to sacrifice for the feminine. It is not by accident that all of those fairy tales and all of those stories about heroes and maidens always have these heroes descending into dungeons and fighting dragons and fighting villains and fighting monsters and awakening maidens and saving maidens. This is not about men and women. This is not about feminism and masculinism and misogyny. This has nothing to do with it. All fairy tales of that nature are all symbolic and they're all esoteric, and they're speaking of the masculine and the feminine, Ida and Pingala and Ida. And the nature of the masculine force and the feminine force, and what the masculine force must do. That is the aspect of us. That is the part of us which gives us the impetus to suffer and sacrifice for others. And the feminine aspect is that side of us which has the compassion and nurturing and space and object of our sacrifice. So that part of us which is connected and united with all things. So when we liberate and awaken our own inner sleeping beauty, which is our psyche, because psyche is feminine, the daughter of Eros. When psyche is awoken, that divine mother inside of us is arisen and unites with the Holy Spirit. And they combine and they unite and they create the divine androgen, which is the cosmic Christ. There is a sacrifice which must be a part of that component. Otherwise, the fecundation, the fertilization, the union cannot take place. Just like the sperm dies to fertilize the ovum, and the ovum dies and becomes the zygote. And it is a zygote, the united, fertilized entity, which can then multiply and become a human being. The egg of our being, that essence, that spark, that seed within us, is no different. But that process of that seed, that spark inside of us, self-realizing and becoming not just a seed of the cosmic Christ, the Logos, but an actual self-realized being who is embodying and becoming one with the Christ. It's like the seed that is sprouted and is growing, and it's just a sapling. It just might be a little tiny little sapling, but guess what? That little sapling is part of the forest. Whereas before, it was just a seed. Use your conscious imagination and meditate on this visualization. See yourself in a great grove of giant sequoias in upstate Washington or the coastal mountains of British Columbia, or elsewhere in California, the great California redwoods, or whatever forest speaks to your heart. Put your conscious imagination into activity and take yourself there to a great forest. You can even imagine the forest from the movie Avatar, if that's what speaks to your soul. But put yourself in a great forest. Perhaps it's the Amazon rainforest. Perhaps it's a Asian forest, a Japanese forest. It doesn't matter. Put yourself in a grove of ancient trees. These ancient redwoods, these giant sequoias, over 1,000 years old. And recognize that you are a seed that has fallen from one of those trees. And look about you. Look about the forest floor. Have you ever gone under a tree in the fall? A walnut tree, an apple tree, any type of tree that has pine cones. The floor, the ground, the forest floor is absolutely littered with seeds or seed pods or fruit in the case of the apple tree or the pine cone, because the pine cone is really a seed pod. There's many seeds in a single pine cone. And the forest floor is littered with pine cones. How many of those pine cones become trees? So when you meditate and you put yourself into the objective facts of you being in the forest, but you're just a pine cone, you're just a seed, and you can look up about you at these incredible sequoias, these incredible trees, these great, wise towers extending into the heavens. And there you are, this tiny little seed. And you look around you and you're surrounded by seeds. There's thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of seeds on that forest floor. And you're just one of them. You are not yet part of that forest. You have tremendous potential. You are a seed. Every seed has within it the potential to become one of those giant sequoias, one of those giant trees. The tree of life inside of us. We all have the potential to nurture and grow and put into activation all of the Sephiroth inside our own tree of life and join the great forest, the great brotherhood of trees. But the seed must first become a sapling. The seed must die. And it is that process of death that we must face. And facing our own death in meditation is one of the most powerful forms of meditation there is. And not just meditating on our psychological death, not just meditating on our egos, and that's all, of course, very important, and that's practical application of this power. But we're talking about actually contemplating and visualizing our physical corporal death. What will take place? What will happen to us? And we're not speaking now of the nuts and bolts of how we died. Were we hit by a car? Did we die from disease? Did we die of old age? Were we mugged and shot? No. That's not what we're talking about here. Just visualizing and putting ourselves, using our imagination and relaxing and concentrating. And for you, it might be as simple as putting yourself at your own wake and observing yourself lying in an open coffin. That's one way to begin. And we don't have to make this morbid, and we don't have to make this dark. Just many people who have had near-death experiences describe their experiences. One of the aspects of those experiences often includes them being able to see themselves. So one of the common experiences of individuals who have died during operations, for example, they have been undergoing some procedure and their heart stopped and their brain activity stopped. They died, essentially. They died on the operating table. And many of those individuals describe how they were floating above themselves and they could see the doctors and the nurses all in a panic, desperately trying to revive them. So there are many ways that one can go about imagining and contemplating and meditating on one's own death. There is no set way which we would prescribe. However, because there are testimonials available to us given by those who have crossed over and returned, it may be advantageous to take advantage of some of those testimonials to assist us or inspire us as we embark on the contemplation and meditation of our own death. Certainly the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Egyptian Book of the Dead are available to us, even if we don't want to put too much stock in individuals' claims about their near-death experiences. Because one of the things that people talk about is that they arrived in heaven, and that when they were in heaven, all of their family members were there, and all of their loved ones were there to greet them, and all these people who have passed away, and they're all there to greet them, and so on. There is a phenomenon when it comes to death, which not many people are aware of. It's not talked about much. We once heard it described as a holiday for the soul, a holiday for the monad. This is a phenomenon whereby one travels through the Bardo, one dies, and because one has had a difficult life, as most people do, a life of suffering, a life of struggle, that the monad is granted a kind of holiday in nirvana. So they are welcomed into heaven, and they are shown a great deal of love and a great deal of, and the souls, the monads, that appear to them in a way that's familial and that's comforting, because that monad still has a lot of attachments. And the more attachments that the monad has, the more their experience of heaven, the more their little vacation is going to be all about comfort and all about what's familial and what's familiar, etc., etc. Because love is severity and mercy. And if you've lived a lifetime of severity, now you've been afforded a little mercy. But it can't last. That experience of heaven is like a subjective experience. It's filtered through the attachments that one still has to family members, loved ones, etc., that they should be the ones to greet you. It's like in that film, the one with Robin Williams and Cuba Gooding Jr. The name of the film is escaping us. But that film is based on people's firsthand experiences of going to heaven and what heaven is like. But that's not what nirvana is like. And only those who have eliminated their attachments and eliminated their egos, or to a large degree at least, and those who have created their solar bodies and only people who are Buddhas, enlightened, awakened, get to experience nirvana in an objective way because they're awake. Those who aren't awake cannot go to nirvana. The nirvana that they experience is subjective. It's through the filter of their own sleeping consciousness. So of course, the monads who greet them, when they appear to them as their grandmother and their father or their loved ones or their dog or whatever. It makes sense. They can't objectively. That's why you don't see people having near-death experiences who come back saying, yeah, and I saw the innermost beings. I saw the monads, the innermost beings of all of my loved ones. They have no idea. They have no concept about innermost being. They think that their grandma is in heaven. Their grandma is not in heaven. The monad, the being, the innermost being who took the form of their grandmother while they were here in this life, that monad is in heaven. And should they go to heaven, that monad is going to greet them because that monad is part of their soul family. So that part they have right. Where your family does meet you, but the family who meets you is your soul family, is the family of monads which choose to work together lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. So your grandmother, your father, your mother, your brother, your spouse, your best friends, your closest confidants and coworkers, or partners or business partners in some great life work that you're undertaking, or right. These are the monads who cluster together, and because they have this familial relationship, they know one another, and they have a karmic. Their karma is intertwined and interlaced and interconnected, and they know each other so well. That's why sometimes you meet people in life, like the people who become your best friend, or the people who you meet are your soulmate or your twin soul. They're your soul mate because in past lives, right? In this lifetime, you might be the wife in the relationship. But in past lives, you might have been the husband. Or you might have been the brother, or the sister, or the mother, or the father. In this lifetime, you may be the wife or the husband. Because soulmates and twin souls can work together in many, many different ways. All the members of your soul family, those monads, can come and play the game and choose different characters according to their needs and according to each other's needs. And much of this actually really only applies to monads who have already achieved nirvana and are reincarnating. It applies to a much lesser degree to monads who are just simply returning, because so much of this is managed by karma itself. To the degree that the monads themselves get together and actually get to determine this, that's a good question. We don't have the answer to that. We would say it's largely irrelevant, because what matters is we wish to awaken and we wish to arrive at a place where we are conscious of our soul family, so that we not only are granted entrance into nirvana, but that when we enter, we experience it objectively. We enter it awake, so that we finally see our soul family, the monads, and we've detached ourselves. We've lost our attachments and our identifications with this body, with this mind, with my husband, my wife, my mother, my father, and instead we can experience face to face now the bonds which we feel here and now on a soul level, because those are your soul family. Those are the people that you meet where you're like, you know what? I've known you before. I don't know how I've known you. I don't know when. I don't know where. I don't know under what circumstances, but you know, you meet those people in your life and it's like, you just click and you're like, it's like I've known you my whole life. It's because you have. Not only have you known them, you've known them for who knows how many lifetimes. And you know them like you know them like you know them. And you just like that. That's a member of your soul family. But this body that they're in, this face that they have, this personality they have, that's all new. Yeah, maybe these things get recycled. Who knows? Like there might be some similarities to past lives. Who knows? But the connection, the bond that we have with them are on a much deeper level. So these bonds, these connections are beyond life. They're through the doorway, the process of death. And in many ways, to be with your soulmate, to be with your twin soul as a couple, to really capitalize on that fact, is to die as the characters, to really feel into not just your partner, but yourself, and that bond that you have on that soul level, and say, you know what? All this stuff on the surface, it's getting in the way, except for those practical, energetic processes that we have at our here and now at this level to work with, which allow us to unite and bind ourselves together as one, as above, so below. So though there might be a lot of things getting in the way, there's also a great deal at our disposal as human beings in these physical bodies. We can work with our physical bodies, with our vital energies, with our mind, with our heart, our emotions, our mental energies. And we can employ them. We can leverage them and use them as tools to lift up and serve our innermost and that of our partner, our soulmate. And if we think about it in those terms, our bodies, our physical bodies, our mental bodies, our emotional bodies, and complete with all the egos that we have. Our egos are like fertilizer. They're the crap. They're the shit that we need to break down, that we need to decompose. And out of that comes this nutrition, which can be absorbed by our bodies, reabsorbed. And if we think in those terms, our bodies, our minds, our emotions, our sexual force, energy, they are the soil, and they are the stuff inside the seed. And the egos as well, that fertilizer that must die, that must be decomposed, that must be processed and transmuted and transformed. That's what alchemy is, to transform the lead of ego into the gold of the human soul. So that the two DNA strands, the two chromosomes, the X and Y chromosomes, can unite and create a true human being. And in fact, that true human being is for each partner. But it's this process of death which precedes that. Eric asks a pertinent question here. In the near-death experience, is the silver cord cut and then reattached? No. No. That the silver cord, as far as we know, to have the silver cord cut is permanent. Certainly, if someone has a near-death experience and they're reporting what they're reporting about seeing their ancestors, their loved ones, their family members, etc., they're having a very subjective view. So in that case, they're just having a very, very, very special kind of dream. The mechanics of the physical body itself do not determine whether or not the silver cord is present or not. Now, you do not require the silver cord to be connected to be able to enter into a body. So, for example, resurrected masters, that's why the great pharaohs, for example, mummified their bodies. We're not speaking of all the. This is where this gets tricky. Because there was a time in the golden age of Egypt when all pharaohs were masters. They were all enlightened, and many of them were resurrected masters. The reason why they were mummifying their bodies is because they were preserving their bodies to be able to return and use their physical bodies at some future point in time. This practice was passed down as a tradition and became a ritual which many others practiced who were not masters, because it's very easy to mimic and copy the physical ritual without having an understanding, without having knowledge of what it really means. And because these were the Egyptian mystery schools, the knowledge of that ritual was kept secret, was really only known by the priests and the masters themselves, and those who were being mummified. Those who were practicing the mummification didn't really know, so they were given a story as to why they were mummifying the bodies. And the story was, well, so that the soul can use the body in the afterlife, which is just a slightly different way of wording it. So there's an exoteric explanation and an esoteric fact. But the exoteric explanation, that superficial explanation, is what gets carried on and passed on long after the esoteric reality or the esoteric fact has been lost to antiquity. So the silver cord is a safety feature more than anything. It is a way for us not to be lost and separated from our physical vessel before its time. So in that sense, so it's not that the cord is severed and reattached. It's like when the body goes to sleep, for example, we can leave, we sort of drift away because we're not anchored in the wakefulness. And the near-death experience is a very special experience. It's not, near-death experiences don't happen mechanically. They're karmic in nature. They are a way for individuals to be shaken, if you will, or stirred into a new level of reality, a new level of awareness. It goes without saying that many, many, many individuals' lives take a dramatic turn following a near-death experience. Not everyone, but many return from a near-death experience changed profoundly. Even atheists and so on. The process of being able to reanimate a physical body, that's something which really only resurrected masters know how to do. Those are very high-level initiations. That is a type of science related to, well, it goes far beyond mere jinn science. So we're not privy to such knowledge at this time. We can't share that knowledge with you. But again, this is the type of thing where it's an interesting question and it's worthwhile discussing to a degree, but only to a point, because at some point we have to ask ourselves, what difference does it make to us at our level where we are at? Does it matter to us? We're not there. And so rest assured that if any of us have a near-death experience and we are meant to return, we will return. And the process by which that happens is beyond our comprehension. And if the silver cord is ever severed between us and our body, and we're meant to return to that body and use that body again, then we will know how to do that when that time comes. But in order for us to do that, we will already have to have been a resurrected master, which means we will have already died, descended into hell, freed souls in hell, and then returned to our physical body and been resurrected and reborn a Christified master already. That's part of the process of becoming a Christified master, is the death of the physical body, and the master descends into hell, doesn't go to heaven, goes to hell, and continues their work as a bodhisattva in hell. So we want to talk about death and how death is the process of creation. And if you want to create a Christified master, there is no other way than to kill the vessel. The mortal man, the mortal woman has to die. It can't happen any other way, because that monad has to experience death and has to experience the sacrifice, the foregoing of nirvana. This is what differentiates the path of the bodhisattva from the path of just any old Buddha, and the spiral path, the path of the nirvani. The path of the nirvani, or the pratyeka Buddha, or anybody else who awakens and then dies and goes to nirvana, is they go to nirvana, and they've earned that right. No question. If you earn the right to go to nirvana, you will go there. You will see monads, and you will be in the gardens, and you will be surrounded by bliss, You will know that bliss, and you will have earned the right to be there. And then you can be there for literally thousands of lifetimes. By that, what we mean is you can reincarnate from nirvana. You descend, you live a life, you work on some egos, you live a good life, you try to be good to everybody, you try to live a positive life, a net positive life, and you return with a slightly higher level of being than what you had when you descended. And you can do that for literally thousands of lifetimes. And it's called the spiral path of mastery. You complete your journey up the first mountain of initiation by taking the spiral path. And by thousands and thousands and thousands of lifetimes, you slowly reach the top of the mountain. And you're entitled to do that. Every Buddha is entitled to take that path. But a bodhisattva takes what's called the direct path. For them, this spiral path stuff just doesn't cut the mustard. The bodhisattva forgoes nirvana altogether. When they die, they go into hell, but awake. So the same thing that the Buddha experiences when he goes to nirvana, he goes awake and he sees monads, and he doesn't see his ancestors, and he doesn't see his family, he doesn't see any kind of worldly attachments. He's awake, he's conscious, he sees objectively the nature of nirvana, and he goes and he is welcome there, and he steps in there and he says, I made it to nirvana, I made it to this level, now I'm a Buddha, now I'm going to enjoy myself, and I'm going to take my time getting to the next level. A bodhisattva forgoes all that. He gives all that up. And instead, when the bodhisattva dies, he doesn't go to nirvana awake and conscious. He goes into hell, awake and conscious. Now, why is that important? In other words, he chooses to go into hell instead of heaven. He chooses Klipoth over nirvana. Remember when we were talking about where do you go when you die? And death is a lot like dreaming. And you're either awake in your dream or you're sleeping, and then you get batted around and it's because the first levels of hell are, in the Catholic or Christian tradition, they were called limbo. And there's sort of the milder versions of hell. We like to explain to people, this is where you go when you take psychedelics. And that's why people who take psychedelics, they think that they're in heaven. They think that they're transcending the universe. They're in hell. They're in the matrix. This is the matrix of the subconscious mind. Because the best prison is the one with no walls, no guards, no barbed wire, no bars, and that people are literally dying to get into. If you were the Black Lodge and you're the adversary of the White Lodge, and the game is this game for the souls of humanity, wouldn't you make your hell the most attractive, enticing, tempting, spectacular amusement park ride of an experience? Don't any of you watch television? Aren't any of you familiar with this thing called advertising? Marketing? How about amusement parks? How about the red light district in Amsterdam? How about Las Vegas? Has anybody gone into a casino in their life? Now, when you go into now, Las Vegas is literally called Sin City. Okay? Las Vegas is called Sin City. It was built by the mafia. Okay? Not the nicest guys in the world. Okay, fine, family guys. Okay, sure. Okay, if you believe the Godfather, and movies like Bugsy, and movies like the latest movie that I watched called Lansky, which is also related to Bugsy and the creation of Las Vegas on Netflix. You know what? Not a bad movie. We actually can recommend it. It's an interesting story. Questionable how accurate, and is it just self-serving, and who knows. But regardless, let's get back to the point. Las Vegas is Sin City. Have you been to Las Vegas? Hello, Roy. Glad you could join us. So you know what Las Vegas is like. You know that when you go into those casinos, you've seen their buffets, you've seen their stage shows, all the entertainment, the lights, the sounds, the glamour, the luxury, you walk into a Las Vegas casino, they make you feel like you're $1 million. Why? Because they want every last penny, whether you are $1 million or not. $1 million, 10 billion bucks, 100,000, 10,000, 1,000. They want every single dollar that you have. So what's more effective? Would it be more effective for them if Las Vegas was all dark and gothic and with people walking around and mafia guys with big tough suits and brass knuckles, knocking people around and shaking people down for their money? No. Nobody would go. Right? If it was a seedy underworld, dark, dank, crummy, scummy place like most of these bookie houses and stuff used to be when they were all illegal all over the country, right? Scummy underground places, whatever. There were very limited markets to people who went to these places. Underground dog fighting rings, and they have these boxing underground fight clubs and blood sport and all this stuff that's illegal that goes under the radar, right? It's all scummy, really underbelly, underground, underworld stuff. And it's dark and it's skanky and it's all this horrid, horrible things, right? But Las Vegas, hey, it's above board. Hey, let's get grandma and grandpa and get them to blow half of their retirement funds on the slots, right? And so and so grandma and grandpa have to feel good about going into a casino and playing the slots. As above, so below, right? As above, so below, right? As above, so below. Vegas, Disney World, amusement parks, movies, television, advertising, marketing, right? They're all designed to entice, to get you in and get you to stay. Get you to stay. The casino wants you to stay. The cruise line wants you to stay. The tourist trap wants you to stay. Walt Disney World wants you to stay. They want you to visit and they want you to stay. As long as you still have money in your wallet and credit on your credit cards, they want you to stay. The second your credit cards are rejected, now you can go home. But in hell, it works a little bit differently, right? They don't send you home. What do? You're out of credit? Oh, well, now you got to, well, you don't get to stay here anymore. So they bump you down to the next level. And you get bumped down to the next level, next level, next level. And that's how that works, right? So they get you and they get you to spend all your money. Then they get you, oh, okay, well, you run out of credit. Don't worry. Here, we'll give you a new credit card. We'll give you a new line of credit. But then you get bumped down. You get more and more in debt, more and more indebted. And they get you on the downward spiral of hell. In much the same way that in Nirvana, there's an upward spiral to mastery. In hell, there's a downward spiral to becoming a full-blown demon. And likewise, it involves returning, right? So they kick you out and they bring you back, but they saddle you with all this with all this debt. So now you're saddled with even more debt than what you had the first time. So now it's even harder for you to get out. So there's a very good likelihood that you're going to take another round, another downward spiral. It's all about the alm of life, right? The alm of life it's the spiral. You can spiral up and in, or you can spiral down and out. So, and death is the transfer point. It is again, as we said, the being is the being, but the form of being, the form that the being takes, and the place where the being goes, the level of being. Death is the transitional process by which a being shifts from one form to another form, from one level to another level, from one place to another place. So coming back to the bodhisattva then, if going into hell for the typical person who's asleep means simply being asleep and being in the lunar astral plane and believing that they're in heaven, or believing that they're just still here in the world, not knowing that they're dead. And they're just being duped on that level. But then there's no guards, there's no walls, there's no need to prevent them from leaving. They don't want to leave. They have no reason to want to leave, right? Because you make it enticing, you make it tempting. And you make it tempting in such a way like this world is, with fornication, with drugs, with psychedelics, with all kinds of stuff. But in heaven, so you just have a new version of that, which gets people, because let's face it, the physical reality doesn't exist. Physical reality is just a virtual world anyway. It's just a virtual experience anyway. And this is hell, the first level of hell, if you really want to be technical about it. And look at all the people choosing the path to hell, choosing to remain in hell, and choosing, because death is the way out of this hell. Death is the path out of suffering. But look at the people who are so deathly afraid of death, pardon the pun. To become full circle back. So a bodhisattva faces death, awake, conscious, but more than that, with the full weight of the pull of the logos, and they forego nirvana. So it doesn't matter how many lifetimes I've lived, mineral kingdom, plant kingdom, animal kingdom, and now human kingdom. Doesn't matter how much of suffering I've done. Doesn't matter. I forego nirvana. I don't need the gardens. I don't need the paradise. I don't need the thousands of lifetimes to perfect myself. No. What a bodhisattva longs for is to be love, to be compassion, to be the light. And not just the light, but the light of lights and the fire of fires that burns in the heart of the bodhisattva. It burns them to think of spending thousands of lifetimes in nirvana, in gardens, and it burns them, the idea that they would waste their potential that way. This is not a judgment on those who are in nirvana. It's not about that. It's the same way that some people in this lifetime, they just have to do something. They have to do it. And nobody else can understand it. Their family can't understand it. Their friends can't understand it. Nobody else can understand it. But it's just something they have to do. And if that something is to sacrifice everything, give away all their money, or live their life for others and live a life of poverty and hardship and struggle and suffering for the sake of others, then that is what they have to do. And it burns inside of them if they can't do it. So when a bodhisattva dies, a bodhisattva goes to hell. Awake. So the bodhisattva doesn't see the universe and the cosmic this and the beautiful that and all or the just another version of reality. The bodhisattva doesn't experience, and the bodhisattva doesn't see what the monads in hell are seeing, because that's all subjective. The monad sees hell for what it is. The monad sees hell objectively. And if you want to know what a bodhisattva sees in hell, read The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. That is why that book was written. And that is why it is the only book that is written. And why that tale of Virgil and Virgil and why Dante wrote that book. And so if you want to know what the bodhisattva sees when the bodhisattva descends into hell, then it's there for you. Which, by the way, is another way for us to meditate on our death. Because up until now, we talked about meditating about looking at our physical body dying and looking at our physical body lying in state, etc., etc. But the other possibility is to read Dante Alighieri's book and contemplate and comprehend monads that are in hell but believe that they are still alive or believe that they're in heaven. And all those people taking psychedelics who believe that they're traveling the universe, they're all just fooling themselves. They're all kidding themselves. Mother Ayahuasca shows the way, because Mother Ayahuasca will take you into hell. Mother Ayahuasca will show you what you need to see, and she'll take you into hell, especially if you have demons, powerful demons that you haven't been able to face. Mother Ayahuasca will show them to you. That's the power of that particular psychedelic. All psychedelics take you into hell, but not all psychedelics are as honest as Mother Ayahuasca. That's why it's called Mother Ayahuasca, and that's why she plays such an important part in the practices of the shamans. Because Mother Ayahuasca can offer healing, because she can show you that which you need to see, and you can experience comprehension. When you see face to face your demons, she'll show you them. But you got to ask her to. Otherwise, you might just be taken on another psychedelic trip. If you go into it, with all kinds of desires, But if she'll happy to show you your desires. But if you go in there with a longing, a deep longing to see that which haunts you. So this is why, for example, Dr. Gabor Mate has such success with ayahuasca, working with heroin addicts and severe addicts of all kinds, sex addicts and crack addicts and addicts of every kind. And he has the only license in Canada to administer ayahuasca as a therapeutic drug for the treatment of severe addiction. And the reason he was given that, because for many years he was taking addicts in groups of 5 and 6 and 8 down to South America to work with the shamans, and he would take them into the rainforest and do an ayahuasca ceremony in the rainforest with the shamans, and it was all explained how it works. And you have to pray, you have to beg to be shown. Show me my addiction, show me the demon, show me the monster, show me that which is, because all addicts, even if they're atheists, it doesn't matter. All addicts will tell you it's a demon. We have a good friend of ours who's an alcoholic. He said to us, he said, listen, it's a demon. It's a demon. I know it's a demon. Anybody who's really honest with themselves, who's an addict and really wants to get over it, they know they have to face a demon. Well, you go and use ayahuasca and you pray and you beg her to show you it. Well, she will. And so that's why it's so effective, because people come out of that ceremony and once you see the demon that's haunting you, right? We had the same experience with our epilepsy. Only we didn't use ayahuasca. We saw our demon face to face simply by awakening in the astral plane. And that demon attacked us. So ayahuasca is not necessary, but someone who's addicted to heroin is going to have a hell of a time projecting into the astral plane. We can tell you that much, right? Because karma and so many other things come into play. So for some people, they don't have much of another option, especially someone who's really severely addicted, because they're so in the grips. So again, in that sense, these psychedelics are offering, again, another insight into where we are going to go when we die. The problem is that with most psychedelics, they're giving this, it's a trap, it's a trick, it's a trap, it's a temptation. It's just it's one of those pitfalls and that we talked about. It's designed to trap us and keep us in hell. While we're here, they'll take us on a trip and we think we're being taken off into heaven, but we're really being taken into hell. Benjamin asked a question here earlier. This is back, we were talking about the Las Vegas and whatnot. Are the mafia and similar entities who provide humanity all of these entertainments to keep us ignorant considered what the Gnostics called the Archons? No. No. What are the Archons? So the Aeons, the Archons are the mirrors of the Sephira of the Tree of Life in Qlipoth. So give us one moment and we will pull up a graphic which will help illustrate what we're talking about here. Okay, this is as good as any. So let's make that as big as we can and share the screen. Okay. So the Aeons are the entities expressing and formulating the worlds. These are the worlds, right? These are the 13 aeons, right? The 10 Sephira of the Tree of Life, and the Ein Sof, and the Ein Sof Hour. These are the 13 aeons. They have their analogous entities in Klipoth, or the lower fifth dimension. This is hell, the subconscious, the unconscious, the infraconscious. These are the Archons. They are the beings, the entities, which formulate the stuff of the lower fifth dimension, or hell. Now, you might hear people refer to the aeons as the Archangels. There's a relationship, direct relationship between the Archangels and the aeons, but the whole aeon Archon phenomenon relates directly to the expression of the absolute into the Tao, because you cannot have light without darkness, and you cannot know yourself if you know what you are, unless you have something which you are not to contrast with. So we've talked about this in the past. We've talked about the chessboard. We've talked about the Tao. And we've also mentioned how the Archons are our adversary, but not our enemy. They just, especially for this planet, especially on this humanity, they're just, things are a little bit out of balance because of the karma of this planet. It's so heavy. The Archons, and the egos, the Black Lodge is just so powerful and so overwhelmingly good at what they do, because they have so much. We have so much to pay for. We have so much karma that it just seems as though they're overwhelmingly in control. But it's balanced out elsewhere in the universe. So one can say that and by the way, when you talk about the mafia, the mafia is actually relatively benign compared with phenomenon like the international bankers and the royal families and the noble houses and the other global elites. I mean, they're all mafias, right? But so in that sense, they reflect. It's as above, so below, right? So they reflect in their hierarchies and in their secrecy and in their underhandedness and backhandedness and in their deception, in their devious ways, in their ways of saying one, obviously deception, saying one thing, doing another, presenting themselves a certain way, etc., etc. There's obviously a glamour that the mafia has enjoyed in the 20th century in the United States, and Hollywood has certainly glamorized and dramatized them, as just as the royal families were, glamorized and dramatized, throughout, from the dark ages and middle ages, throughout the entire, that past millennium. So deception is their way, and in that sense, they are expressions of and manifestations of Archons, because they are doing things here in the kingdom according to the will, the ill will of the Archons, the Black Lodge, the egos, which are the entities which constitute the lower fifth dimension and the worlds of hell. In other words, let's put it a different way. The aeons are the solar hierarchies. The aeons constitute the solar hierarchies. The Archons constitute the lunar hierarchies. We have our angels, they have their demons, their devils. And we have angels and archangels, they have demons and archdemons. We have cosmo creators, they have their equivalent. We have masters, they have black magicians, right? We have Buddhas, they have black magicians. We have masters, they have master black magicians, sorcerers, and the list goes on and on and on. Everything that it's just like the Jedi and the Sith, right? The Force is the Force, and it's just how you apply that power, how you apply the Force to what ends. So when in all those cliches about, you know, the war for the souls of humanity between the forces of heaven and the forces of hell, all of that is real. All of that is accurate. There are holy and righteous and divine and helpful and altruistic and loving and compassionate entities, and then there are destructive, tempting, coercing, deceptive, lying, cheating, stealing, robbing entities. Like, it runs the gambit. And, you know, from horror movies to monster movies to mythologies to science fiction, but all of these things exist in the mind space because they're real. Materialist science is the Antichrist precisely because materialist science is the single most potent, powerful force of hypnosis and ignorance on this planet. Materialist science, the one that says that this is the stuff of reality, and that only the things that you can see, touch, taste, only the things you can see, touch, taste, and hear and smell are real. That and the mind and how it is able to program and hypnotize the minds with such vigor makes materialist science the Antichrist, because materialist science convinces us that we are the spacesuit and not the being, not the astronaut inside this physical 3D spacesuit, which is allowing us to experience this physical 3D virtual reality. Any phenomenon which gets us to deny ourself, our being, and hypnotizes us into believing we're something else is the Antichrist. Because the Christ is working nonstop all the time inside each and every one of us, trying to get us to awaken and realize what? Realize ourselves. Self-realization. It's a practical term. It's not a Heidi-flighty. It's not an out there. It's not a woo thing. It's not some kind of spectacular cosmic phenomenon that takes place while you take psychedelics. No. Self-realization is the realization. What does it mean to realize? To realize is to die in your hypnosis and ignorance. To be or not to be. How are you all feeling? Are you feeling like we could go another hour, or are you feeling like you've had enough death for one night? Because we could wrap it up and call it a night if you're so inclined, or we can spend another hour or so. We're going to leave it to you this time. We're going to see if we could take a kind of a poll, see if any of you are still awake. There's an interesting thing about that to be or not to be speech that Hamlet says. To die, to sleep no more. And again, we've talked about this in the past, where Hamlet in that speech, let's see if we can. You know what? We weren't planning on this. So let's we were not planning on this, but let's do this anyway. Let's have some fun. We don't know if you consider this fun, but we consider this fun. So you may know, we've said this in the past, we studied English and drama in university. We acted on the stage. There's nothing better in the world for an actor to act than Shakespeare. Shakespeare is the truth, the energy is in the words. And we're talking about death. And this speech is often interpreted by the Muggles as Hamlet contemplating suicide. And we've gone over this. We're sure we've gone over this in the past, but we're going to read this. And we're going to read the whole thing. And then we're going to go back and focus on specific lines relating to death. So bear with us. And now we can't do this without our glasses, unfortunately, because we don't have it memorized. We have most of it memorized, but to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take up arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of disprized love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes when he himself his quietus makes with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear, to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country, from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others we know not of. Thus, conscience doth make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment with this regard their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action. We don't read this. We don't feel this. We can't perform this monologue the way that all the pretentious Shakespearean actors of the last century have done. Because everyone is so morose and everyone is so heavy and dark and deep, and they're all so, and they think that because this is the most famous speech that Shakespeare ever wrote, that it has to be given with this weighty depth of, I don't know, high and flighty falutin something or other. And no, it's a very practical, down to earth speech. So what is he saying? Well, to be or not to be, that is the question. To be, one, awake, aligned with, and in service of your innermost being, or not to be one with your innermost being. To be or not to be. That is the question. That is the question. That is all of spirituality. That is all of metaphysics. That is all of religion and divinity and yoga and everything in a single line, in a single phrase. The whole of the path distilled down by a master esotericist and a master wordsmith and a master dramatist into the most famous and most important words ever written in the English language. We can go on and on and on about this for hours. And we have a video on this speech, but we're going to cover some of it or a lot of it here again. We can't emphasize or put too fine a point on just how important those words are and how practical they are. And if only those people who are hooked on psychedelics could comprehend that opening statement. Because we often ask them, say, okay, you take psychedelics and you can go and travel the universe. Okay, that's fine. You can go and travel the astral plane. Okay, you think you're in the solar astral plane. You think you're with the gods and everything. Fine. Okay, good. All right. But let me ask you this. When you find yourself in the astral plane and you are undergoing the fifth initiation of fire, and you are told to project yourself into the sixth dimension, into the causal plane, and you are there in a temple of the Great White Brotherhood, and you are being given the opportunity to project yourself into the sixth dimension, to become a Buddha, an enlightened one, and enter into nirvana awake. They are not going to give you any psychedelics. They're not going to give you any mushrooms. They're not going to give you any DMT. There is no DMT in the astral plane. There are no mushrooms in the astral plane. There is only your consciousness and your being and your capacity to meditate and to project into the astral plane. How will you do that? Project from the astral plane into the causal plane. A skill which you have to learn to do here and now, projecting from the third dimension into the fifth dimension. You learn how to do that, then when you're in the fifth dimension, you can project from the fifth dimension into the sixth dimension. Makes sense, right? But how are you going to do that? How are you going to make the leap from the fifth into the sixth if in order to get into the fifth, you have to take psychedelics? No one who takes psychedelics has ever been able to answer that question because they don't want to answer that question. They don't want to face the question. They want the question to go away. They want this question to be or not to be. They want that question to go away, but that question won't go away because it is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take up arms against a sea of troubles and, by opposing, end them. Basically, hopefully that's clear enough. But basically that's saying, which is nobler in the mind? To take on a burden of suffering and craziness, this outlandish, a sea of troubles, an ocean of problems, an ocean of suffering, an ocean of sacrifice. The slings and arrows, like the attacks, because slings and arrows means that we're under attack. And rest assured, like many of us, we have all felt this. We've all felt ourselves under attack, especially when we're standing up for our principles, especially when we're standing up for what we know to be true and what we know to be right. And all saints and all martyrs and all those who are doing the work of their innermost being face the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Outrageous fortune. So what's more noble, to give into that, or to take up arms against those and oppose them in order to end them? In other words, to take up the weapons, to be defensive against all of those slings and arrows and the outrageous fortune, and oppose all of that. In other words, to turn our back against our destiny, to choose comfort and security, because security is what taking up arms means. You arm yourself, right? To protect yourself. And all of a sudden you're focusing on me. Now, here we get into the lines about death. To die, to sleep no more. Now, 99% of actors who perform this perform it wrong. They interpret this wrong. They say to die, to sleep no more. And by asleep to say blah, 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 blah. They're equating death with sleep. But clearly, the line is to die, to sleep no more. Through death, we can awake. In other words, we are asleep. We are asleep. Hamlet is saying that in so much, that's what he's saying. The whole to be or not to be speech is about that. And the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune are what catalyze our death. What's better? What's better? To brave the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or take up arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them? So the structure of it is, what's better, to suffer or to not suffer? What's better, to be or not to be? Now he's saying, in the same structure, what's better, to die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to? 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep. To die, to sleep. Then he says, to sleep, perchance to dream. So perchance means perhaps, possibly, to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. We have to. Shakespeare is very clever, and he's masking his. He's masking what he's saying here, clever with how he's using sleep. To die, to sleep, okay. To sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub, meaning there's the point. For in the sleep of death, what dreams may come? What if when we die, the same thing happens to us when we die, when we go to sleep, and that is, we dream. What dreams may come? By the way, that is the name of that movie that I mentioned earlier that I couldn't remember the name of the movie, with Robin Williams and Cuba Gooding Jr., where they created this movie based on all of these near-death experiences, and they came up this visions of heaven and everything else. And it's based on a book called the 10 People You Meet in Heaven or something like that. Anyway, the movie is called What Dreams May Come. It's Robin Williams and Cuba Gooding Jr. So that's the what we would call the Hollywood Hallmark greeting card, New Age version of Nirvana, New Age version of heaven. It's the subjective version of heaven. It's truly the version of heaven for people who dream when they sleep. And that's why it's not by accident that they called the movie from this speech, because they don't understand the esoteric implications, the metaphysical implications of this speech, of Hamlet's speech. Okay. To sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. So there's the point. Because in the sleep of death, okay, if we dream, right? For in the sleep of death, if we dream when we have died, then that must give us pause. That must make us pause and think and consider and reflect. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. So there's what makes a tragedy out of a long life lived. If you live this long life, and at the end of it, when you die, you just start dreaming, then your life has been wasted. You've wasted your life. And what did you waste? And why is it a tragedy? He lists here Hamlet does. Shakespeare does. This to go through life, a long life, and to end up dying and just dreaming basically means going to hell. And it's a calamity, it's a tragedy, because you've just gone through all of this. Okay? Who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of disprized love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin. So he's saying, who would bear all of the suffering of life? And the law's delay is karma. The pangs of disprized love. Think about that. Disprized love. What is disprized love? It's love lost, right? So if love is a prize, if love is like winning the lottery, falling in love and being in love is like winning the lottery, is like winning a prize, then having your heart broken and love lost is being disprized. And the pangs of that, right? The pangs of, it's the flavor of that, it's the experience of that, and the pain of that. And the law's delay is the delayed nature of karma. And so, and the insolence of office and the spurns that the patient merit of the unworthy takes, that patient merit of the unworthy takes. So the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes. This is a hard one. The unworthy takes, he that is unworthy that takes, right? So, and the spurns of, like, spurned love, that patient merit. We're just trying to express this in a way. It's difficult for us to translate it, to be honest with you, because for us it already makes sense the way it's written. So we're trying to, patient merit is all good things come to those who wait. The spurns of that are the sufferings of the patient merit of waiting while those of the unworthy takes. So those who are unworthy take from the merits that those who are patiently waiting for. So again, this is a difficult one, but imagine all good things come to those who wait. So you're waiting for all good things to come to you. But while you're waiting, you have to suffer the indignity of watching those merits be taken by those who are unworthy of them. Okay. Now, why would you suffer all of that when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? His quietus make, meditation, and with a bare bodkin. Now, this one's difficult. It all depends on how you translate bodkin, but it's really your self, your bare self. So you make his quietus, his meditation, Why would he suffer all of that when he could sit in meditation with himself, stripped bare? Who would Fardals bear? Who would Fardals bear to to grunt and sweat under a weary life? Who would choose to carry the burden, to grunt and sweat under a weary life, under a difficult life, but that the dread of something after death, the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. Now, interesting, from whose bourne no traveler returns. We are born into the undiscovered country, and it is death. It is through the process of death which we are born into that undiscovered country. So remember what we said earlier. Every birth is preceded by a death. Every birth is facilitated by death. But there's a dread of something after death. The undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. We can't return from death. Once we are born, we've you know the expression, you've made your bed, you have to sleep in it. Once you've laid a course throughout your life, and after you die, you face the dread of that something that's awaiting you after death. You have to face the dread of that, because there's no returning from that. You can't come back from that place, from that undiscovered country. No traveler returns, and this puzzles the will. And makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. When we face with dread death, when we fear death, we fear the unknown from which we cannot return. There's no turning back. Obviously, Shakespeare was speaking in general terms here, and philosophical terms, and in practical terms. He wasn't speaking in terms of near-death experiences, because obviously we talked about that. Some people have come back, but they also didn't really experience death. They experienced a short version of it. They experienced what they needed to experience in order to have a transformation of their life, but they didn't really experience death, and they didn't really experience what comes after. If they did, they would have been really electroshocked into a completely different level of consciousness, or they would have done what Shakespeare is talking about here, and that is facing the undiscovered country and dreading what that might be after death. It's a puzzle for the will. So now the will, which is willpower, which is telema, which is the causal body, which is the inflection point, which makes us Buddhas, which makes us awake, or the lack thereof, which keeps us asleep. We rather bear those ills we have. We'd rather stick with and carry the egos that we have and the defects and vices that we have and all of the suffering that goes along with that, then fly to others that we know not of. Now, that relates directly to the relationship between what he was saying earlier about the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. So conscience, apologies. Thus, conscience doth make cowards of us all. If he's asking whether it's, because this is bringing it right back to the beginning, because this whole monologue is a single theme. It's a single comprehension that Shakespeare is crafting into words, and it is a comprehension. It's not a level of understanding, which is why it's so difficult to explain and talk about. And it's so difficult for people to understand. You can't understand it. You can only comprehend it. So Benjamin says here, for example, he says, is he also saying that we should bear the ills we have or kill the ego now in this lifetime rather than be reborn to an undiscovered country and start all over again? Okay. What he's saying when he says to the dread of something after death, right? It's the ego that fears death, right? Death and what follows after death puzzles the will. It's a puzzle. It's a trap, right? It's like a Chinese finger trap. It's a puzzle for the will, just like bearing the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune makes many people to take up arms against a sea of troubles and by avoiding end them. So this fear of death, this fear of the undiscovered country from whence we cannot return, makes us bear the ills we have, then fly to others that we know not of. These others that we know not of are the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, which are awaiting us if we choose to be. But because that is related to death, to dying to sleep, to awakening, to die, to sleep no more. To sleep no more, we become aware of the undiscovered country. We discover a new country, and in that new country is a whole world of trouble, is a whole world of problems. It's a whole world of ills, of slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that come part and parcel with awakening. So we choose to bear and suffer that which we know. You know the expression, the devil you know versus the devil you don't? Benjamin just had a revelation. So most people, right? Conscience makes cowards of us all, because in our conscience, right? The angel on our shoulder, whispering in our ear, do this, do that, right? But the devil pops up and says, no, don't do that. Don't listen to him. It's going to be too hard. It's going to be too uncomfortable. It's going to be filled with pain and suffering. Right? Our conscience makes cowards of us all when we choose to bear those ills we have then fly to others that we know not of. This idea of flying is like being awake in the astral plane where you can fly. Where awakening and liberating yourself. And when you fly, that means you're lighter. When you're lighter, that means you're no longer bearing the ills you have. You've cast them off yourself. You've freed yourself from the egos that you have. Now you can fly, but guess what? You're going to see now a whole different level and a whole different world of hurt and a whole different world of suffering and a whole different level of suffering. The slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, the path of the bodhisattva. Because it's like when you're playing a video game, when you first start the video game and you're at this low level, it's easy, right? It's easy. And then when you get into harder levels and harder levels and harder levels, the game gets harder and harder and harder and harder and harder. But the game difficulty matches your skill as a player, right? But there's lots of people that play the game on easy difficulty and they never turn it off of easy. They just play it on easy. They don't want a challenge. They want to know, they want to face the challenge that they know. They don't want to dial up the difficulty level. It's like people who go to the gym and always lift the same weight. They just go, they lift the same weight. They always do the same routine and they always lift the same weight. They never improve. They never increase it. They never challenge themselves. And thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied over with the pale cast of thought. This is such a beautiful and vivid line because he's talking about, he's invoking images and color. Now, resolution means two things, right? Resolution they didn't have computer monitors in Shakespeare's day. So a resolution it's like a solution. But it's to have resolve. The native hue of resolution, the color of that, the color of the resolution, the clarity to have it's the native color of clarity. To know, in other words, to see, to know. And it's native. In other words, it's self-evident, right? It's self-evident knowledge. It's this native hue, this native being intrinsic, integral, right? And the hue of that, the color of that, the image of that, to be able to see that resolution is sicklied over with the pale cast of thought. So conscience knows, and conscience presents to us with this clarity, this native hue of resolution, this perfectly formed, clear, sharp, concentrated image of what we need to do or what we should be doing. And that is sicklied over by the pale cast of thought. It's like a pale shadow is cast on that by our mind, and we sicklied over it. In other words, when you're thinking about it, and people are when you what's coming to mind is a Hungarian expression, and we can't find the English expression that's trying to express this. But when you're churning your mind or something around over and over and over again in your mind, and you're thinking yourself to death over something, right? Like in your heart, you know what you need to do. Your heart knows, right? Your conscience has given you, you know clearly exactly with that native hue of resolution. But then your mind gets in the way and casts this pale shadow of thought over that. And what is the result? Enterprises of great pith and moment of great pith and moment. We were talking about seeds earlier. Pith is the food inside the seeds that the germ uses to sprout. That's the pith inside of a seed. The great pith and moment, so pithiness, that dense enterprises of great density and potential, right? Like the pith inside the seed. It's a great seed. It has the potential to be a great sequoia, but it's moment by moment that potential is there. Those enterprises of great pith in the moment. With this regard, right? Their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. They lose the name of action. What is this name of action? I am that I am, the holy name of God. To be. It is what it is. That's the currents. That's the being in the current. To be in the current of the moment of the great enterprise is to act on the conscience of the native hue of resolution in the moment, to be in the current, to be the name of action, to be an agent of the name of action, to be I am that I am. That's the holy name of God. To be a seed of the Logos, to achieve the potential of the Logos, to sprout, to become a tree in the forest, in the great forest, the great brotherhood of great sequoias, that is the Logos, the perfect multiple unity, that is the forest. Is, but what happens? We're trapped. We're making ourselves sick with thought. And we're casting these pale shadows of belief, of opinion, of ideas. And, we did a live stream on the nature of the mind and conquering the mind or remaining its slave. This is the rub right here, right now in this speech, is explaining that whole live stream. And conscience making cowards of us all, in this whole speech about, and the fear of death, all our work on fear, and this whole live stream on death, and the live stream we did on the mind and conquering the mind or remaining its slave, and our articles of to herd or not to herd, our memes about being a servant of the innermost, of being who we are, of self-actualization, of realizing, of awakening, of all of it. It's all of it. It's all in this speech. All of it. The point of it. This is why these are the most important words ever written in English. And this is why this speech is the most performed, the most quoted, the most prized. And directors and actors, and they love performing it, even though they don't understand it. It doesn't matter. They know deep down in their heart, they know that there's something in here, even if they can't get to it with their mind. They can't peel away the layers. They don't have the keys. They don't have the equipment. They don't have the esoteric tools with which to dissect this, and they're not awake. and the language is impenetrable. So what happens is they rely on art historians, and they rely on experts in Elizabethan language and blah 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 and this and that, and they put their faith in more intellectuals. In other words, everybody, right, sicklies over this passage, and the essential meaning, the essence, the universal truth, capital T, is lost, because the mind just casts this pale, shadowy cast of thought, of intellectualism. But coming, and so losing the name of action and losing the enterprises of great pith and moment, and the current turning awry, all of this is not to be. You see that, right? Okay, to be or not to be, that is the question. Okay, Shakespeare sets it up. To be or not to be, that is the question. ... Everything that follows is an elaboration and an explanation of this first line. And yes, death is a part of this. But death is only a catalyst. Death is a test. Death is a vehicle to be. Avoiding death and avoiding the dreading over it and the undiscovered country which no one can return from, and choosing to stick with the ills that we have instead of all that unknown, undiscovered crap that we know not of, right? Makes us cowards. And the clear messages that we receive from our conscience, we second guess, and we turn to our sick minds, and we allow our minds to I love that word, sicklied over. And we know that there's an equivalent modern contemporary English expression. It's just not coming to us. We know the Hungarian expression. It's the same thing. It's like in Hungarian we say "Töröm a fejemet" means literally I'm breaking my head over it. Right? When Shakespeare says is sicklied over with the pale cast of thought, a Hungarian would say I'm breaking my head over it. Like, just how's that for a visualization there, right? When you're thinking too much about something, Hungarians say I'm breaking my head over it. Like, I'm literally like smashing like boulders, with my head. That's like the Hungarians. Like, Hungarians are very passionate, right? So we get very vivid in the visualizations, and our language is very onomatopoeic as well. So yeah, so it's like we can say it's like we're churning it over. There's an expression like we're churning it over and over and over in our head, right? So when you churn butter, right, what happens, right? You turn cream into butter, but you do that by churning it and churning it and churning it and churning it. And what happens? You transform the cream into butter. But guess what? It started out as cream, but now it's butter. And so certainly if cream flows, right? And in the cream rises to the top and the cream flows, and that was your current. Now you have this lumpy mass of fat, which isn't going anywhere. The currents have gone awry. They've turned awry. You've churned this thing so many times over in your head that it scarcely resembles its original form. Now, this is the ego's degenerated version of transmutation, and the intellectual will tell you that, oh no, but that butter is more pure. It's pure fat now, right? We've worked it, we've churned it until we've transformed it into this new thing that we can spread on toast. So it's better than cream, right? So, but that's not a esoteric, that's not a Gnostic way of looking at things. It's a sick version. The pure cream is what you began with, is what you received, is what you were given. That was the knowledge. Now what you've done, you've churned that knowledge into butter. It's not cream anymore. It's now butter. And yeah, you can spread it on toast and you can impress your friends with all this butter that you have. But guess what? It's not cream. Cream is what lightens coffee, right? Cream is what brings light to darkness. The cream rises to the top. But if you churn it over and over and over and over and over and over and over in your mind, you will lose the name of action, right? Cream, it no longer is what it is. You cannot say that butter is cream. It's not. It's not. It's not cream. Yeah, you can make bulletproof coffee with butter, but you can't cream coffee with butter. You need cream. So again, losing the name of action is not being. But the enterprises of great pith and moment, when we first heard this speech, the Atlas Project was born. That intuition that we had came to life. This line has always spoken to us, our life's work, the enterprise of great pith and moment, and also when he sits and he lists all of the suffering, right, and the patient merit of the unworthy take is, and the law's delay, right? In other words, the time that we have to wait for the effects, for example, of our good deeds, of our sacrifice, right? It's hard. Or if we're expecting instant karma for the ill deeds that are done to us. If you're waiting instant karma and you're waiting for those who have done ill deeds to you to suffer, I mean, that's something that no one should really long for or hope for or wish for. But either way, whether we've done something wrong and we want an opportunity to pay for it, but we have to wait. The law's delay. Karma, there's a delay. Sometimes people experience what they call instant karma, but that's generally speaking not how karma works. Generally speaking, there's quite a bit of delay between cause and effect, at least in terms of our experience of it. And sometimes we have to wait for next life. And that's, again, why this relates directly to death and why he's talking about the calamity of having a long life. It's not the long life that's a calamity. The calamity is if we have a long life, but when we die, all we do is dream. Oh, well, there's the rub, right? Now our long life is a calamity because we've wasted it. We've lived this long life and all we've accomplished is nothing. Because when we die, we shuffle off this mortal coil and we go to sleep. We dream, in other words. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come. So again, we return to dying before we die, facing our death, contemplating our death, knowing where we're going to go when we die. How important it is for us to conquer the ills we have, not bear them for fear of those that we don't know of, for fear of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, but rather to die to sleep, to die to sleep no more, to awaken and face the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, to not bear the ills we have, then fly to others we know not of. Instead, to bear the enterprise of great pith and moment and put ourselves into the current, into the flow of that. To turn the right way, not awry, but to turn the right way, to be and gain the name of action. And then we can be one with the name of action. I am that I am. Meditate on aheye, esher, aheye. I am that I am. We've done a meditation where you visualize yourself going inside, becoming one with your innermost being, and then facing the Logos and praying to the Logos. Now, if the Logos' name is I am that I am, meditate on the Logos, the great I am. Meditate on what it takes for you to become the second I am in that statement. I am that I am. This is what it means to be. Anything short of that is not being. Because to be, I am, is to am, is to am. And what is God? God is everything. I am that I am. Except that which he isn't. And he isn't the adversary. That which tests and tries and tempts and obstructs and degenerates and conflates and corrupts. Within all of us, we have the potential. We are all seeds. And some of us may even be saplings. Some of us may already have sprouted. Some of us may be saplings. We just don't know it. Or some of us may still be seeds that have yet to germinate. Know yourself. And whatever you believe about yourself, let those beliefs die. Forget about preserving ideas and beliefs and, about yourself, and instead fly to the undiscovered country. Seek to die before you die. Meditate on your death. Meditate on what goes beyond, on what is beyond. Meditate on where you will be. Benjamin asks, the second I am, meaning like Christ? No. Christ is not a man. Christ is a force in the universe, the Logos. That is the I am. I am that I am. Okay, because it's the perfect multiple unity. Remember that there is no singular God. There is and there isn't. For example, your body is one body, but it's made up of countless trillion cells. And many of those cells are single-celled organisms that are living in symbiosis with you. For example, all of our gut flora, all of the bacteria in the body, which are separate organisms, but they're part of your body, and your body couldn't survive without them. So you say, I am, right? You say, I am. Now imagine that there is a entity in the universe which exists of monads. And all those monads constitute cells in the body of this entity. That entity is the cosmic Christ. That's the Logos. The perfect multiple unity. The unity, the body of all of those monads, of all those entities. And he says, I am what I am. I am this entity and that entity and this monad and that monad and this monad and that. I am all these monads. I am this. I am that I am. I am what I am. Now, are you going to be one of those monads? Yes or no? That's what Shakespeare is asking you. To be or not to be? Are you going to be one of those ams in I am that I am? Or are you not going to be one of those ams? Are you going to be a cell and part of the body? Or are you not going to be a cell and part of that body? And it's the body of Christ, right? So that's actually a double entendre, right? When he says, you go to a Catholic church and they say, this is my body, which has been given up to you. And the priest gives you the host wafer, and he says, body of Christ, right? He says, you eat of my body, but he says the body of Christ. It's really, are you going to be part of the body of Christ? Are you going to be a tree in the forest? It's like the forest saying, the forest says, I am what I am that I am. But you realize the forest is made up of trees. So the forest says, I am that I am. I am that tree and 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 that tree. That's what constitutes a forest, yes? So the question is, are you going to be a tree, yes or no? Or are you going to remain a seed? And a seed eventually, if it doesn't turn into a tree, it eventually gets eaten by a squirrel, or it gets buried, it's eaten by, and then it rots, and it's eaten by worms, and then it truly does not be. All right. Thank you, one and all. And thank you also for the extra hour, because we had a lot of fun. This is we absolutely love Shakespeare, and even though it's a very, very, very difficult thing to try to express to you what we feel when we read it and what we feel in these words, like, because we come at this really as an actor, but as someone who studied acting as a martial art, so we feel the energy in these words. So for us, it's to try to translate that into something intellectual or into words is very, very difficult to do. What our native hue when it comes to Shakespeare is to perform it for you, is to put our knowledge of the meaning of the words into action. That's our native hue of resolution when it comes to this speech. It's our intuition and our natural way of being when it comes to Shakespeare is to perform it and to allow the truth of it to flow through us. But of course, we can't do that as a talking head properly on YouTube, right? Like, we're in our element when we're on the stage performing this. And when we perform this for an audience, they get it, right? They finally get it. They finally understand, or they begin to understand what it means. And they starts to click to them that it doesn't mean what the textbooks and what their English teacher said it means, because it doesn't. And as we've gone through it, it's clear that he is not talking about committing suicide. In no way, shape, or form is he questioning whether or not he should kill himself. And the fact that everybody thinks that just goes to show you how sicklied over this speech is and how pale the shadow that has been cast on it. So thank you all for giving us a chance for sharing that with you and going through that, because that's always fun, especially for Friday night. Okay, so Benjamin finishes off here saying, thank you for showing us the deeper and esoteric meaning of this speech from Shakespeare. It is really worth contemplating to know ourselves in truth. As we said at the beginning, right? It's the whole of the path. It's the whole spiritual question. It's right here in the first line and this explanation. It's and moment by moment, and what you stand to lose and what you stand to gain. It's all here. And the pivotal role that death plays, and it's that the reason that the fact that death is in there and there's so much power in that is why one of the reasons why this speech is so weighty. The fact that people know intuitively that there is so much gravitas to this speech. The problem is their intellect takes them to the thing that has the most gravitas for the ego, which is death. Because there's nothing that the ego fears more than death. Physical death, but also psychological death, the death of the ego. It makes sense, right? It makes sense that the ego would fear its own death more than anything else. And that's why the intellect will always interpret this speech the wrong way, because the ego mind will always purposely try to turn everything to its own advantage, including people's understanding of this speech. Okay, so thank you all. Thank you all for coming, and have a wonderful evening. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. Yeah, so have a good night and have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye for now.